Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joinedup. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. Thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a weekly show featuring interviews with fantastic authors sharing their personal stories on how and why they write. There's hints and tips for aspiring writers and great book reviews from top bloggers. Follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast. Right, cue the cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 86 with Emma Viskic, Australian author of the excellent Caleb Zelig series of novels. And this was one of a trio of face-to-face interviews I did in a single busy day down in that London. It's rare that I get to meet my guests in person, so it was lovely to be able to chat to Emma before she headed off to Edinburgh and then back to Oz. I loved hearing how Emma moved from music to writing and the lessons she learned from both disciplines, and she's got loads to say about the benefit of constructive feedback and how it helped her to hone her work. Speaking of which, I've been continuing to implement the feedback I've had from my beta readers, as well as some line edits based on comments I've had from my critique group, Phoenix Writers. I'll be honest, it's been a tough couple of weeks. My day job has been busy, filming in various locations around the country, and even when I have found myself with a spare half an hour in a hotel room, I've just felt too mentally fried to do anything constructive. I'm trying not to be too hard on myself, because that's what I always tell other writer friends when they're struggling, but I can't shake off the feeling of guilt that comes when you lose momentum. Suddenly, the horrible grating voices of self-doubt get louder and you start to question if there's even any point finishing the damn book. Does that sound familiar? Well, I'm not here to bring everyone down and suggest we all join in one big literary suicide pact. No, I'm just using today's intro to tell you and me that I'm shaking off the monkey from my back and putting him back in his cage for a while. I feel like I'm starting to mix too many metaphors here, but the point is I'm drawing a line under all the negative crap that's been weighing me down, and I'm getting back to the real work of finishing the draft that will be going out into the world before the end of October. So as I record this, it's September 23rd, so I want to send the full thing back to one of my beta readers for her to submit to a new imprint. And once that's done, I'll be submitting to agents. There, I've said it. You all heard me, so don't let me off the hook. But what about you guys? Are you battling self-doubt or indecision? Struggling to fit in your writing around your day job maybe? Looking for excuses not to finish your book? Well, confess, you'll feel a lot better. And you can do that by getting in touch, dropping me a line at wayne@waynekellywrites.com, tweeting at JU Podcast, or following the show on Facebook. I'd love to hear from you, so please get in touch. Right, let's start that motivation now with the Emma Viskic interview. So Emma is a classically trained clarinetist and author of the critically acclaimed Caleb Zelig series, Resurrection Bay and Fire Came Down. Resurrection Bay won the 2016 Ned Kelly Award for Best First Fiction, as well as an unprecedented 3 Davitt Awards. And Fire Came Down is published now in the UK by Pushkin Press and available at all good book stockists. I also want to thank Tabitha for letting us use her flat in London as a venue, and I hope you all enjoy the chat. So thanks a million, Emma, for joining us on Joined Up Writing, and a rare in-person interview for me as well, so that's good. It's always actually good to see the person that I'm speaking to. So just to start us off, I've actually literally just finished reading your first book, Resurrection Bay. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about your character, Caleb Zelig, and a little bit about how he came to be, and a little bit about him.
Well, Caleb Zelig is I guess some people call him a private investigator. He's a fraud, anti-fraud detective, and he is profoundly deaf, which is probably the thing that I speak most about, because it's a slightly unusual way to get into a crime novel, really. His origins date back years, really. When I first started writing the novel, Caleb's character was pretty much there from the beginning. And it's one of those things where it's not until afterwards where you've written the book, and often after it's published and you start talking about it, that you see where everything came from. And recently I was going through a whole lot of my childhood writing for an event I was doing, and it's this little archaeological dig through my psyche. And it was fascinating. I could see his character popping up in stories even back when I was 10, 11, 12. Right. And some of it dates back to when I was about 10 and went to school with a girl who was profoundly deaf. About that age when you're really getting interested in the way other people's lives come together. So there's definitely, there was that little point in time. I then went on to write some stories. There was one with a man who was blind, one with a girl who was mute, with, very...
kind of working your way through the senses.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And then the really classic teenage, the invisible girl, a lot of things like that. But I think a lot of it dates back to my grandparents, who were Croatian immigrants and who didn't speak English. And as very typical of the period of the time, I didn't speak Croatian. So there was these issues around communication that have been there really since when I was born, really. So all this was percolating away in the background. And so when I came to write a crime novel, Caleb, I thought, just walked onto the page, but actually I can see now he was coming for decades, really. So
it was kind of slow. It was kind of a slow burn.
Yeah, definitely.
So tell us a little bit about that first book. As I say, I've just finished it, and it was brilliant, and it got me. I'm not just saying that because you're here, although I probably would have to say that, but it genuinely was great. It got me from the first page, and as you say, especially with the way that the book starts, I know you can read the blurb and you kind of know that he's deaf, but that first chapter, it's really cleverly done, the way you kind of seep that in without necessarily the reader realising until you sort of get to the end of the first chapter, and then the penny drops kind of thing. But yeah, so tell us a little bit about that first book, and then we'll move on to talk about your most recent one.
So Resurrection Bay, I knew I wanted to write a somewhat traditional PI book. So that's its framework, I guess you'd say. But I also wanted to turn it on its head, really, a little bit. So I very much wrote it on two levels. So I wrote it to be read as a page turner, if that's what you like. But there's a lot of stuff going on beneath the surface, which is the stuff that I'm really interested in. It's about relationships, about loss and identity. Obviously, writing a deaf character, it comes into identity a lot, and because I also have Aboriginal characters as well, that comes into it. So I very much wrote it to be read on different levels, depending on what you like, but also depending on what I like as well. I do like plot. I think of the plot as being the car that's taking you places, but the only reason I'm there is because I'm really interested in the people in the car with me, and they're the characters.
It's the journey that you're interested in, and who you take,
who you're with,
and who you're going along with that. So you mentioned it's a lot about identity, and yet the deafness doesn't really define him as a person. Obviously, for people that can hear and maybe don't know any deaf people or people of hard of hearing. Give us a sense of some of the, I know it sounds obvious, but some of the challenges that he actually faces, and by the same token, some of the kind of extra senses that he can actually use as well. Yeah,
one of the things that really surprised me when I really started getting into writing the novel, and it took me about 5 years to write and research, and I do them concurrently. I don't research and then write. They really happen at the same time. One of the things that really surprised me in that time was the strengths of him being deaf, both for me as a writer and for him as a character, because when I first started off, it was very much, well, he won't be able to hear people who aren't looking at him. He has great lip reading skills. I did a lot of research on lip reading and spent a lot of time going out into the world trying to lip read with earbuds in my ears. Some people are. It's a spectrum, really. Some people are really good at it. There is a woman who works for the FBI who can lip read video, which is almost impossible to do. Other people can't do it at all. So Caleb is obviously in the better end of the spectrum, or I couldn't have a novel really. But it does mean that even for him, if someone is chewing gum or smoking or has a heavy beard, he can't understand them well. So he's piecing information together all the time. If someone sneaks up behind him, he can't hear them. He's got to rely on vibrations from floorboards or feeling the air move as someone opens a door. So all those things make him vulnerable, which is one of the things that really drew me to him. I've taken that most invincible of characters, a straight white man, but I've made him deaf, which makes him vulnerable. And that's the sort of thing I like playing around with. But where the deafness really becomes a strength for him is he reads people really well. And I don't mean lip reading. I mean, he looks at their body language. He notices how they interact with other people, when they react in a way that he's expecting to, when they don't react in a way that he's expecting to. And so it makes him an incredible observer of human nature. And as a writer, that's been great because it's made me a lot more aware as well. I think I've always been a people watcher, but I definitely didn't notice the space around me in the way that Caleb does.
And did you? I think I mentioned. I looked in the research for this before. So you actually, presumably, you had to learn some sign language.
Yeah, I did. I first of all, I wasn't quite sure if he was going to be a signer or not. So I signed up for a short course to begin with Auslan, Australian Sign Language, and I'd been thinking that it could be a good way of showing him in a comfortable way, really, that in a way that lip reading doesn't let him be comfortable, that sign language might. 10 minutes into my first lesson, I went, oh, this is it. This is fantastic. I'm going to have to do this. It's an incredibly expressive language, Auslan, all sign language. And so it shows a very different side to him. And it also made me realise that it would show his relationship with other people. So the people he's closest with sign with him. They might not be fluent, some of them are, but they're at least attempting to join him in his world rather than him having to come to them all the time. So I did that first course and I thought, well, that's probably enough research. But I got a little obsessed. So I went on and studied at TAFE and went on to do that. And I think sometimes it's that, I like to quote Donald Rumsfeld in these things, it's the unknown unknowns. I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah, sure.
So, and the more I learned about it, the more I learned about the experiences of people, the multiple experiences of people who are deaf, and realising that they're all very different. And then, I also got the benefit of learning a fantastic language.
And did you find one of the things that you obviously, I like the fact that you've used, obviously, I'm guessing you took some of it from your first attempts to learn sign language.
Oh, yeah.
The mistakes that people make that are maybe new to sign language or they're just starting out, and some of the literal translations that they do and stuff.
Yeah, so I don't often put direct experiences into novels. So it's usually often a tangent, but Frankie, Caleb's business partner, her Auslan is almost exactly the same as mine. It's like the level of a 3 or 4 year old. If you've got a really foul mouthed, 4-year-old, and the syntax is slightly wrong, and so you can absolutely make yourself understood. But when I realised that Frankie was going to sign a little bit, I went, oh great! Every single mistake I make, it's going straight in the book. So instead of it just being embarrassing, I get to use it.
But presumably, it's the attempt. It's like a lot of these things. I guess it's like speaking any foreign language.
Yeah.
It's people usually appreciate the attempt to at least communicate on the same.
Yeah, it's certainly been my experience with the people that I've been signing with that they've, even it might be an atrocious attempt, but they are appreciative
they try not to laugh
of
in your
it.
face.
Yeah, exactly. And certainly I appreciate it when people try and help me in languages that I understand. Yeah.
So in terms of, obviously people often talk about trusted readers and things for whatever genre or whatever writing that they're doing. So did you kind of have to run this through, or did you want to run it past, in inverted commas, the deaf community, or somebody that would be able to at least sort of fact check it, or say, well, hang on, that doesn't really ring true? Yeah,
it's a really interesting line to walk, that one. So I didn't have one trusted reader for it, mainly because, as I said, every experience is so different within the, deaf community, and that's the capital D culturally deaf community, which Caleb isn't part of, or the small d deaf. But I did just speak to a lot of people, and so I would run ideas by them, and just ask them questions. So some of the things I didn't realise, and that I couldn't have realised unless I spoke to people, things like hearing aids pick up background noise. They don't make you a hearing person. They can just lift volume. It doesn't make your hearing clearer. It will just give you a bit more hearing. And so that the idea that you'd be sitting in a room and the fan would be annoying you because that's all your hearing aids are picked up on. So most of it was me talking to people and asking them about, hey, what's the situation here? And tell me about it and discussing things.
And would there be times, that you'd probably pick up after the sort of first draft where you'd think, hang on a minute, he can't do that, or he wouldn't, were there many of those? Or did you find yourself kind of really embedded in the character?
No, I really got inside his head. In fact, almost the opposite happened where even now I'll be reading someone else's book and think, well, they couldn't possibly have understood that. They weren't looking at each other when they spoke. So, I really went quite far inside his head so that the opposite thing happened. Some of the things along the way were decisions I had to make. So, like, could he speak on the phone or not? So there are lots of people with enough hearing and with the right hearing aids can have phone conversations. There are fantastic Bluetooth, applications and things you can do now. So can you speak on the phone or not? Well, actually, once I made that decision, it's clear. No, because that makes my life so much better as a crime writer.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't pick up a phone and call someone. Fantastic.
Which is the thing that ruins most modern fiction.
It is the worst. I think it's why so many crime writers are doing historical fiction now. There's CCTV and mobile phones. It makes our life almost impossible.
It's very difficult to not just go with, there's not a lot of signal here, or the battery runs out. There's not very many things that you can kind of do to kind of get around it, because most of the time you think, well, just make a phone call. Yeah,
I mean, I think you can have a plausible excuse once or twice, but every chapter is like, oh no, now my battery's down, or I forgot to put credit on it. Yeah,
exactly. So tell us a little bit about the latest book, the book that's just come out.
And Fire Came Down. It picks up about 7 months after the events of Resurrection Bay. It's in the middle of a heat wave in Melbourne. And Caleb's not coping too well after the events of Resurrection Bay. I think in a lot of ways it's a novel about the aftermath of trauma. So it's about him having to deal with things that he doesn't want to have to deal with, really. And it begins one night. A woman approaches him in the street. He's out jogging. He doesn't have his hearing aids in, so he's got limited ability to understand. It's in the dark. And she signs 2 words to him, help and family. But before he can work out what she wants, she's attacked and runs into traffic and is killed. And he's left not knowing why she's come to him, who sent him, whether he's in danger, whether anyone else is in danger. And he connects her to his hometown of Resurrection Bay and goes back there. And that's where I think you'd have to say that he has to face a lot of his own demons.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I think facing some trauma is probably an understatement, having just read the first book. So he's got a lot to deal with, yeah. And he doesn't really like dealing with, in inverted commas, personal issues. Really,
that's exactly right, yeah. And I think that's one of the things that interested me most to explore in Fire Came Down. How do you get someone who doesn't want to face personal issues and has a pretty bad track record of facing them? How do you get them to deal with things? Or do you not? Do you have that classic, PI who never actually changes? So that was actually really fun.
Well, I suppose that's a bit of a question, isn't it? If you're writing a series particularly, it's because it fundamentally can change where you go with it in the future. I mean, presumably you've got plans, I'm guessing you're already on the 3rd or the 4th book or whatever. So what were your thoughts about that? Did that kind of change how you thought about where you would take him emotionally? Yeah,
definitely. So one of the decisions I needed to make was how many books was it going to be? I always knew I wanted it to be a series and that I wanted it to be a short series. To write like a 20 or 30 book series, the hero can't change too much, or else it becomes, you spend the first 60 pages explaining what's happened previously. And I want there to be consequences of events and actions and decisions in my novels. So that they're just the characters that I really enjoy. So I always knew it was going to be short. So it was then a matter of working out how many books, is it 3, is it 7, is it somewhere? So at the moment it's going to be 4. And I'm in the middle of doing book 3, and definitely the decisions I made in book 2 have very much guided me in where I'm going with the various characters and plots in books 3 and 4.
Excellent. So let's take a little bit of a step back then. What about yourself? So tell us a little bit about what you did before you became a published author, and kind of how much of that sort of feeds into what you do now, would you say?
Yeah, so ironically, my first career was as a classical musician. So 100% focused on sound and nuances of sound. And the irony did strike me as I was writing a deaf character, but the more I got into it, the more I realised it's actually, they're not as different as I first would have thought. They're both about communication, both about reaching out, connecting with an audience in different ways. But it was really interesting for me to turn off my ears, basically, and stop concentrating on the oral side of life. My way into novels is often through dialogue, and it's how I get to know my characters. I get them chatting to each other.
Me too,
yeah, I really enjoy that. Someone's going to say something interesting at some stage, or something unexpected, and you go, "Oh, look at that! Oh, that's who you are," and that's how I get into it. So. I do a lot of eavesdropping, and I just really love eavesdropping on public transport and in cafes and things. So to have to change that a little bit and take the physical side was really interesting. But of course, dialogue is probably more important for Caleb than hearing characters, because he has to concentrate on it so hard. I just needed to find a different way into it. Writing-wise, I found being a musician has really influenced me. I mean, it's hard for me to tell because it's me and it's my life. But as I start teaching a bit more writing and talking to people about writing, I realise how much I think about rhythm and pace and cadence in the writing, both in a bigger way in terms of plotting. It's here we've had a quiet moment, a bit of introspection. Now something needs to happen. Is it a big moment? Is it a medium moment? So there's those bigger cadences through the whole novel. But also even within a chapter or a paragraph or a sentence, how are the words putting together? What's the rhythm happening here? And I read all my work aloud multiple times. Often in public, which is a bit embarrassing. I'll be working through dialogue as I'm walking down. I suddenly realise someone's walking up behind me. I'm having a conversation with a killer in my head. But yeah, the idea of all the things I've learned through music definitely have seeped through to my writing.
Yeah, and dialogue. Yeah, it's good. Something I want to speak to you a little bit more in more detail in the epilogue, the kind of bonus question, because I think the dialogue is excellent in your books. So in terms of actual writing, when did you know? I mean, did you write as a child? Did you? So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've always written. I started writing as soon as I could read. I grew up on the outskirts of Melbourne in what's now suburbs, but was sort of half bushland, swampland, building sites. So and very free range. Come home when it's dark. So spent a lot of time just outside. Playing stories, a little gang of us would roam the neighbourhood and look for dead bodies and be and sort of and be sort of a bit Enid Blyton-y in an Australian way. So there was all that, but of course when it rained, you went inside. So or it was just nighttime or whatever. And so then it was just reading. And we lived a long way from the libraries. So if I ran out of books, well, I just wrote my own. So it was always just there. It was just something I did. And I think perhaps as a young child, I thought that I would write when I was older. The idea of being an author was a bit distant, though. All the books I read were written by English and American writers, usually by men, and they just felt very distant and perhaps unachievable. I'm not sure how much of that would have been conscious, but it's stuff when I look back now I know was sort of in my mind. And then I got sidetracked as a teenager into music. Started learning the clarinet, and for some reason classical music seemed like a good career choice. I ended up doing that, and I guess it dropped away in my 20s. I always wrote. I wrote all the time, but it definitely dropped away in my 20s, and but I really missed it. It took me a little while to work out that I was missing it, and that it was writing that I was missing. And then one day I thought, well, maybe you should start actually writing again. And I kept sort of trying and just dabbling around the edges. I thought, well, that's actually just making it worse. It's like going out for a run once. Yeah. Don't run once every 6 weeks. It's just going to be painful. So I went, oh, well, I'll write a book. That's what you do. You just write a book, and I did. Well, a manuscript. It wasn't published and will never be published. And it was terrible. It was appalling. But I loved it. I loved the experience so much. I thought, all right, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm absolutely hooked now.
I want to take a very quick break there just to remind you to keep sharing the show. That could be on Twitter or Facebook, or by leaving me a review on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. But often, even more effective can just be you telling one of your friends that loves books or writing about it and nagging them basically until they've subscribed. They won't regret it, and you'll look really cool by recommending them a new podcast. Okay, let's get back to my chat with Emma, where we talked about a turning point in her writing journey. So do you kind of remember, was there like a turning point where you thought, oh, hang on a minute, I think I can actually do this, and then you started to think seriously about, I want other people to have a read of this? Yeah,
well, first of all, I just enjoyed the experience. So that was like having a nice hobby that I did. But then I started my second manuscript, and Resurrection Bay is actually my third. And I started my second one, and it got to a stage where I was thinking, actually, I'm spending a lot of time on this. I actually want to take it seriously. And I went to a few writers' talks, I guess, and the information at the end, what advice would you give to young writers? And so many of them said, write short stories. And I ignored it the first couple of times. By the time about the 10th person said, write short stories, I went, oh, right, write a short story. Okay. And I went home and I went, okay, I'm going to write a short story. Which is so hard to do. Short stories are so hard. But it was invaluable advice. It really was. I learnt so much from writing that first short story. I learnt how to really edit my work. I thought I was quite a lean writer anyway. It turns out I had so many extra words in there, so many extra characters, so many extra plots that didn't need to be there. And one of the things I did was I thought, well, I'll write it for a short story competition, because at least then I've got a date and I've got a word limit, and I've got something to work towards. Because of the word limit, I knew I had to cut it down. And I sent it off, and I sent it off to the Ned Kelly Awards. They've got a short story competition, and it got shortlisted. I went, oh, someone likes my writing. Wow, because until that stage, I actually literally shown it to nobody, including my own family. So then I wrote a second short story, really enjoyed the process, found it difficult, but again, learnt so much more, sent it off to another crime writing competition, and I won it. And I went, oh, 2 people like my writing. Yeah. And that really gave me a huge boost. And that's when I really started getting stuck into the novel and going, all right, I'm going to do this. Maybe it'll get published, maybe it won't, but I'll write the best book that I can at the moment. And I guess that confidence really helped you to actually finish it and craft something. Not just to finish it, but to keep honing it as well. Not to go, oh, well, that holds together as a book now, but to keep going back and do it. Yeah, it definitely made a big difference. Excellent.
And so after you wrote, well, which was your third, was Resurrection Bay was your third manuscript?
Okay.
Yeah. So did you find by that stage, when you went on to write the next book, did you find that you'd kind of honed your process, or did your process change? Because presumably that was, well, tell me about your actual road to publication. So when you'd finished Resurrection Bay, you know, did you just immediately, where did that go? Did you send it out? Did you have a trusted reader? Where did that go?
Yeah, no, I had a really interesting road to publication in that it's not quite typical. I had worked on the last draft of it with a fantastic mentor, Jeanette Curry, through the We're Mentoring project, who I'm going to meet very soon. We've only communicated in via email because she's in Scotland and I'm in Melbourne. So that was a fantastic experience, and that was a little masterclass in just learning how to look at your own writing and to edit. So I had what was a very finished product, as finished as I could make it without going through an editing process. And I was getting to the stage where I thought, well, I'll send it out in 3 months or never. You know, they were my options really.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I'll send it to agents. So in Australia, you don't need an agent to get published. It's probably about 50%, you know. But in the meantime, one of the publishers who I'd been following on Twitter, I knew were looking for manuscripts, and they actually approached me because I'd won 2 short story competitions by then. What are you working on? And I said, oh, well, I've got this thing, you know. So I sent them a partial, and they made me an offer a few weeks later. So it actually, in the end, happened really quickly. I'm still not entirely sure if I would have ended up sending it. I probably would have. Yeah, but I was definitely in that.
Kind of pushed you. But again, something else that came from the short stories in a roundabout way.
Oh, definitely, yeah. It got my foot in the door. It got some attention because they could see that I'd been taking it seriously, and I had a bit of a track record rather than going in totally cold.
Excellent. And so once you'd got that out there and you went through the deep editing process with a publisher, well, how did that feel first of all, and what did you kind of learn from it, do you think?
Well, funnily enough, with Resurrection Bay, it was pretty much ready to go because I'd had the experience with Jeanette. So it ended up being quite a painless process, really. I mean, there is that moment when you first open up the edits and you sort of look through your fingers and go, oh my God, there's a lot of comments. But in the end, most of them were quite small. There are a couple of very to the point, if you clarify this, it will really, you know, just focus something.
Sure,
so that was great. I really like that. I think I'm lucky in that because of my classical music experience, I'm used to getting very direct feedback on artistic things, and it's really confronting, but you have to have good feedback from people you trust if you are to grow artistically. So even though part of you is dying inside that somebody doesn't think this is absolutely perfect as it goes out, you actually really want that. I actually really enjoy getting good editorial feedback, as much as, you know, it hurts as well.
I know what you said, rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
you do feel better after, well, you are better after it if you take
definitely.
it on board.
Yeah, no, being edited is the best. I mean, and the editors want to make it the best book it can be. I think troubles come when either the writer doesn't, you know, can't let go of any control, or not even control, where they can't believe that there could be anything that could change, or when the editor doesn't have the same vision for the book as the writer. But I've been really lucky in my editors. I've had 2, and they've really got what I was trying to do.
That's excellent. Yeah. So what's up next? You've kind of mentioned a little bit that you're in book 3 as it is. So tell me a little bit about that, and when can we expect to see the next slice of Caleb? Yeah, so
book 3 is called Darkness for Light, which is another biblical quote, because I'm drawn to the Old Testament, you know, a lot of pathos there, and that'll be out next year. I'm writing it at the moment, so I can't say too much about it.
It's still
really
going.
Yeah.
But are you enjoying the process of writing it?
Yeah, I know. I'm actually finding writing book 3 a lot easier than book 2. Book 2 is very much the dreaded second book syndrome, you know.
Second album,
absolutely. I spent a lot of time when I was writing and Fire Came Down, Googling second book syndrome, you know. It's like...
Why do you think that was? Was it the kind of pressure because the first one had done okay?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things. Second book syndrome is no matter how your first book has gone, if it's sunk without a trace, that gives you pressure. If it's done really well, that gives a different sort of pressure. But I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that you spend your whole life writing your first book. You know, no matter if you're 30 when you write it, you've spent 30 years writing. If you're 60, you've spent 60 years. It's just there percolating away. And your second book is like, go. Yeah. So you suddenly have to take what has been a very organic process usually and be quite structured about it, really. So there is that. But definitely having some success, it makes you, you don't want to let people down. Sure. So it definitely adds a bit of pressure there.
And so by the time you started the third book, you kind of felt that structure was there and you kind of got more of a process. If you were sitting, well, yeah.
So I'm laughing at the word structure and process.
I know. Yeah. Well, if you were, let me put it this way, if you were sitting down tomorrow to start a brand new book, have you kind of got a set way of approaching it or a set process or not at all?
No, it's terrifying. So I don't pre-plot at all. I start with a few scenes. I can see some scenes and I call them my little road signs. So I know that I need to get from this scene to that scene. Sure. I just don't know how to get there. And in fact, I write a lot like I walk and drive. I get lost a lot. It takes me to some really interesting places, and sometimes the place I go via is more interesting than one I'm going to. So it can have some real advantages, but it means that it's slow. It takes me a long time to get anywhere, physically and also in my writing. I go down some cul-de-sacs along the way, definitely. When Fire came down, I was lucky that I had the very first scene in mind right from the beginning. I knew how it was going to start, and I knew the feel of the book. I knew that it was going to be hot and oppressive and claustrophobic, and actually I even had the title pretty much from the beginning as well. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have much else apart from that. With Darkness for Light, I only recently got the first chapter, and I was very much having to just trust that was going to come. And because it's a third novel, I knew it was going to be a different sort of first chapter than my first two novels. It needs to start in a different way because it's in the middle of a series, basically. So it took a long time for that one to come together, really.
To kind of get there. Mm. But it's obviously you're finding your feet more and more, and you find it, and presumably you're becoming more comfortable with your own process. So, for a start, was it a little bit terrifying, the fact that you were going off in all these different directions?
It's
and you're
always
wondering
terrifying
about how you're coming back.
Yeah, it's always terrifying. So I think I probably write double the amount of words that get published, or maybe even triple. I mean, I write an extraordinary amount that end up gone because I really have to write the chapters before I work out where the story's going. Sure. And once I know where the story's going, I go, oh, great. I think most of the time for me it's about just make a decision, because it's not a matter of coming up with ideas. It's a matter of choosing one of the ideas. So I'll be at a crossroads. I go, well, if I do this, then this will happen, and then this will happen, and then this will happen. So a lot of the time it's about cutting out the options and going with them. I think definitely book 3, I'm instructing myself to be more comfortable with my process. I did spend a lot of book 2 trying to make myself write what's called the quick and dirty draft. There's that theory, and it's something that Stephen King talks about a lot, where just get a really rough draft down in 3 months. And then you can spend the rest of the time honing it. And I thought, that'd be great. I love the idea of that. 3 months to get the plot down, because the plotting's the hard part. It's the plotting that I hate. It's so hard.
Thinking,
It is. It's just, it's just, and there's so many little threads you've got to hold on to. I thought I'll do that, and then I'll spend, the rest, because I do a book every 2 years. So, that's so much time to be then honing the language and the poetry of the language. Oh, it'd be beautiful. After 10 months, I realised that the quick and dirty draft was not going to happen, and I just need to do what I do, which is all over the place, really.
And it's that thing, isn't it? The only rule is that there are no rules, really.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the only rule is don't follow other people's rules.
yeah. Do what's right for you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. Well, just as we kind of wrap things up with the main interview, just tell people where they can find information about you online and if they want to follow you on social media or whatever.
Yeah, so Emma Viskic on Twitter, or I have just joined Instagram, so you can look at my 5 bad photos on that. Facebook. I chat to people on Twitter all the time. And there's also a website hanging around there somewhere where I put sort of, latest news things.
And blog posts and things out. Well, I'll put all that in the show notes. Thanks. But for now, Emma, thanks a million. That's great.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, thanks again to Emma, and you can find all her books on Amazon and all good book stockists, as well as more information on her website, and I'll put all of those social media links in the show notes over at joinedup.co.uk. That pretty much wraps up things for another week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Overcast, Spotify, or wherever else you want to get your podcasts from, and that way you can have the show downloaded automatically every week. Also, remember you can get in touch with all your writing news, views, questions or comments, or maybe you just want to moan like I do at the beginning of each show, and you can tweet me with where you're listening or why you enjoy the show, and I'll give you a mention in a future programme. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing and reading, and I'll see you next time.
Joined up, right?